Hello, everyone. I am Ms. Gian, and this is chapter 3 of our course in social psychology. And in this video lecture, we will discuss first how we perceive our social worlds, then how we judge, explain, and later, what are the expectations that we have and why does it matter. So before we officially begin with our first topic, which is perceiving our social worlds, let's go over this topic first. And before we officially begin, I want you to read this one. So dog likes lakes, Luck licks lakes, Luke's dog licks lakes, dog takes licks and lakes Luck likes. Luck takes licks and lakes. And I want you to tell me the first word that comes out of your mind if you see this picture. So diba automatically we can observe that there is a duck. And why does this happen? So it's because the brain automatically filled in what it was expecting to see. So sometimes, makitaan po na niya ang mga things na it was primed to see through various stimuli. And this perfectly illustrates our main point, which is we don't see reality as it is. We respond to reality as we construct it, and our perceptions act like tinted glasses, coloring everything we perceive. So think about this concept because your brain just demonstrated this. Mao gini ayahang it just underwent what is happening. So it had expectations about what the picture would look at, and those expectations literally changed what you saw. So it's not about being stupid. For example, the duck picture, it's actually designed na pwede siya double. So sa side, if you look at it closely, in another angle, mura siya bunny. So it's not about being stupid or you not being able to see the bunny or the rabbit. It's about how our minds normally work. So we're going to explore two key areas about this one. So first is how our existing beliefs affect what we perceive right now, and how our current ideas can actually change how we remember the past. So it's the after the fact ideas bias recall. Now, what are the implications? The implications are huge. Our social beliefs don't just sit there passively, they actively shape what we see in social situations. And this cognitive efficiency usually serve us well, but it comes with systemic biases that we need to understand. So in this next slide, I will show you a video. It's called The Money Experiment. And I want you to carefully watch this one.
Change the way people act without them realizing they're being manipulated. We've asked members of the public to take part in a series of tests which are being run for us by psychologist Peter Naish.
So, nothing nasty to do, so hopefully you'll be happy to stay right the way through.
The participants are given a one-handed counting task.
Ready, steady, go.
They're told we're looking at left and right-handedness, but this is just a front.
Now,
A second group of similar volunteers do the same test, but instead of boring old bits of paper,
this is where we get you to count a pretty large pile of money.
they get to count real banknotes. This is the only difference between the two groups. Let's see if that small difference can affect their behaviour.
Now, we're going to give you some sweets.
We've asked both groups to compare two bowls of sweets.
What we want you to do is say which you find the most chocolatey, the most crunchy, and so on.
Given 10 minutes to make their decisions, something rather interesting emerges. On the left, those who counted paper only eat enough to answer the questions. But the people who counted money just kept on eating. Amazingly, the group that handled the money ate 50% more of the sweets. But my psychologist friend Peter tells me we can also change how people treat each other, again without them realizing they're being manipulated. I have to see this. First, we reinforce the priming. Both groups get an identical word task, except that for one group, the words are related to money and wealth. Then we secretly film them and watch their behaviour. As my friend struggles with a pile of papers, some of our volunteers stop to help her. But not everyone feels the need to help. Guess what? Those who handled the money are more likely to keep on walking.
Oh man, that's really bad.
I'm an awful person.
No.
It's not that they're simply being unhelpful. Psychologists have studied this and found all kinds of subtleties. It just seems that money makes you more self-reliant. And self-reliant people expect other people to be self-reliant too. Our primed volunteers don't think my friend needs help.
So what the video showed is a social psychology experiment. And this experiment used priming in their research. So unsa din ang priming? It is the hidden influence. It's awakening or activating certain associations in memory ninyo. And it is usually an unattended stimuli. So when I asked you to do a tongue twister a while ago, it contained a lot of words na saying duck, right? So that's me priming you so that ang next nimo makitaan is automatically the duck rather than the rabbit. So even right now, something is happening to you, which is, or the priming is actually happening to you. So, dili lang mo aware. Okay, again, it is an unattended stimuli and its influence is subtle. So, what's an example of this one? There is an example, aside from the one that I showed you, wherein a study found that when there was a faint scent of cleaning products a room, the students were faster in identifying cleaning related words. And they kept their work areas more, they kept the work areas tidier. And they had no idea na the scent was influencing them. So in real life applications, for example, if you watch a scary movie, then you're more likely to detect threat. Or if you hear and naamoy mga ilaga sa balay, na you would hear the thumping sa dagan-dagan sa ilaga as someone na probably inside your house or robber something or mga what. So, mana siyang priming. So, it happens in real life. So, people who are also depressed are more likely to view the world negatively or more likely to see negative associations. It's also why people who are anxious are very good at reading micro expressions, especially of rejection. So they're very high in detecting those kinds of signs of rejection or social ostracism. Next, we will look into our way of perceiving or perception. So, our perceptions are colored by our beliefs. And although we have biases, right? We mentioned that we have these biases that we don't see reality as it actually is. Despite that, we're actually pretty accurate most of the times atong social perception. Pero it does not say na when we're accurate, we can do no wrong now or we cannot, because we're accurate, we don't make errors anymore. So this just means na yes, there are times wherein we can accurately perceive our surroundings and our social environment. But from time to time, we make errors. So here's an example class. So researchers showed identical news segments sa about a Middle East conflict sa mga pro-Israeli na respondents and pro-Arab na respondents. So each group was convinced the media was biased against their side. So they were given the same footage, but they ended up having completely opposite interpretation. So unsa inyong ma-remember ani na example? So it was the Princeton Dartmouth kanang experiment, right? Or consider this another example. So this study, they showed people the same photograph of a man. So there's two groups. Ang usa ka group giingnan na, oh, this man is a noble hero during the time where the Jews were fighting the Nazis. He was resisting the Nazis. So ang other group, si group B, giingnan siya na, no, this man right here, the photograph that you see is actually a very cruel, poor person. Siya ang responsible why a lot of Jews were killed, and he was also the man that conducted very say tagani, harsh experiments on the Jews for medical reasons and such. No, he was portrayed as a cruel man, and what they found out was that people saw different expressions sa the same photograph. So sa group na where they were told na it's a hero, they said he looked determined and noble. and he has kind eyes. Was a pikas na group where they were told na he is actually a cruel person responsible for thousands of killings. They looked at the expression and perceived the man's expression as menacing, like na siya smirk and na siya evil plans. Okay, so that's an example of the errors that we do, or how our beliefs are colored by, or how our perceptions are colored by our beliefs. Now let's move on to spontaneous trait transference. This is another phenomenon. And what is this one? So when you describe someone else, say calling them gossipy or calling them bakakun. So when you were talking bad about someone to another person, that person would unconsciously associate the trait with you. Okay, so mo na siya, this gives us a lesson na if you are gonna talk about somebody, don't talk bad about them. Talk or share a good news about them. Kaya mo balhin anin mo. Okay? Overall, the key insight here is that intelligent, well meaning people can look at identical evidence and reach opposite conclusions pertaining to what the Gestapo leader study was about. Okay, it's not about being biased in a deliberate way. It's about how our existing beliefs automatically shape our perceptions. So let's now move on to discuss another topic, which is perseverance. So the beliefs survive the discrediting of evidence that inspired them. And it's a troubling finding in psychology, and you will understand why most conflicts happen and there is polarization all throughout the world, especially politics. Ano man. So there is a study by researchers sa psychology, and they gave people fake information connecting sa risk-taking personality sa firefighter performance. This was a study ni Ross and Anderson. So the group one were told that risk takers make better firefighters, and the other group was given the opposite information, wherein they were told na cautious people do better as firefighters. Then they asked the participants to make sense why this is so. Bali, they planted a fake information. They asked the participants to explain, to generate a theory, to make sense of that information. And of course, people came up with a perfectly logical explanation for whatever information they've been told. And what's funny, because when the researchers revealed na ang information na given to them was all made up, ang ilang beliefs still persisted 75% of the time. It was still powerful. So even though they now have the information that they were only in a study or an experiment, the information was not real, their belief still persisted. So why? Because once we create explanations for our beliefs, those explanations take a life of their own. So mura kag nagbuhi og pet. Kaning pet imong gi-nurture, imong gi butangan og time sa pag-explain and all, make og connections and all. And eventually, the beliefs that you nurtured, the beliefs that you created and tried to make explanation with, they quote quote grew their own legs. So the more we examine and elaborate on our theories, the more convinced we become. This explains why simply debunking false information often does not work, especially when you're debating someone that has a different view than your own. Especially when 100% of the 100% ka sure na this is what's real. Okay, for example, flat earthers, they believe the earth is flat. So if you try to give them scientific explanation, you know what, the earth is round. And if you give them historical information, the Magellan was able to travel and use another route. So that also is a proof that the earth is round. Their belief will still persist, not the earth is flat. So mo na siyang dili gyud siya mo work because we have what we call belief perseverance. So even when the original evidence is gone, our explanations that we created makes this belief alive and kicking. Where there's a remedy is not a lost cause. Kay, if you ask people to try to consider the opposite, explain why there are possible alternative theories that might exist, it breaks the spell. So mo ni siya ang kryptonite ni belief perseverance. So say for example, the flat earther, you would not counter them. You would say, oh yeah, you know what? I get your point. But can you generate an explanation about the world being round? Just hypothetical lang. Just try to generate why the earth is round. And then also generate an explanation why the earth is flat. So, because now they are considering other possible explanations, dili na dayon sarado ilang utok. Okay? So the act of generating multiple possible explanations is much better than digging deeper into one's theory. So for this next slide, we will challenge another assumption that we all have about memories. When we're talking about memories, diba, we usually think of it as a box na when we with full of flashcards, and then we want to remember something that happened in the past. We just retrieve that flashcard and then read it. Or say a better analogy would be CDs, no, a box full of CDs. So we get a CD, and then say your 5 year birthday, or when you're 5 years old na may birthday, i-retrieve mo ang CD, i-feed it sa kanang CD player, and then now you have the memory of when you were 5. It doesn't really happen that way, because memory is, when we try to retrieve it, we don't retrieve the actual event, or actual event in 100% accuracy. So memory reconstruction is not retrieval. They're not the same. So every time you remember something, you're reconstructing a dinosaur from the bones that scattered everywhere niya, or bone fragments that were scattered everywhere. And when you're trying to reconstruct this bones scattered everywhere, your current feelings and knowledge, as well as your expectations, also fill in the gaps. So Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated this with thousands of research participants. It's called the misinformation effect. So unsay nitabuan ni sa yahang experiment? Yang gipakita ang mga people og videos of car accidents, and then later she asked questions that contained false informations. For example, ng mga false information, a yield sign would become a stop sign on people's memories. Then a clean-shaven man would sprout a mustache. So the post-event information literally rewrote the memories of these participants. So let's go close to home. We also reconstruct our past attitudes. So example ani is katong students no, who were tasked to write an essay arguing against their own views, and then they later denied that their attitudes had changed. So it's very striking, no? Kaya they revised their memories so quickly and completely that researchers described the speed, magnitude, and certainty as striking. So we become, as one researcher put it, little butterflies who maintain we were always butterflies. So, and lastly, there's also something called rosy retrospection. So what does this mean? Or unsam din siya? It just means, or it means now we remember pleasant experiences more favorably than we actually experienced them at the time. Usually this happens when you're in vacation, and when you're in a relationship as well, and even mga painful, life-threatening events like childbirth. Ang tanang negative aspect na imo na experience with this will suddenly go to the back end of your mind. Like, di na mo siya ma-remember, or siya ma-erase. While ang ma-highlight is ang positive aspects, ani. That's why we have a rose, kanang bitang, what do you call that word? Kanang, I don't know if it's an idiom, pero a rose-tinted glasses. So we only see the positive things. So when you graduate from the university where you're studying, and then when you come back as an alumni, suddenly everything is so nice. You're so nostalgic. You miss the university, but in reality, it's the mixture of negative events and positive ones are balancing out each other. Parihara, you also experience mga sad events there, but imura siyang forget. That is rosy retrospection. So if you're thinking of going back to your ex, or yung mga ex din ha, remember this one, okay class? Remember rosy retrospection. What might be, mana ka na, may patusiya ka, ingan na. You might be remembering just the good things or the good stuff, and then forgetting the bad stuff. That's also why it's very important na mag-journaling mo para naging mo evidence ba. Para in case na minga mo na pud ka balik niya, mubasa lang kasi mo journal, then mao di ay nabuwag mi kay ngani din ni siya. Okay? Ya din kanon yang kugmo or something like that. Yeah, so let's move to the powers of intuition and the perils of intuition. So I'm talking about us judging our social worlds for the next content. So despite all these limitations we're discussing, our unconscious minds are remarkably powerful. So most of our thinking actually happens off screen without any conscious awareness. We have two systems of thinking. Diba? Remember this from chapter 1. There's the controlled, reflective, deliberate thinking that you're doing right now as you listen to me. And there's also the automatic, effortless, unconscious processing that's constantly running in the background. So in this section, we will both look at the power of our intuition and when this system of ours goes wrong. Let's first discuss what makes our intuition powerful. So I'll give you a real life example. So na mga chess masters, right? And they can look at the board for just a few split seconds and they can immediately see the best move. Another example is your face recognition system can identify thousands of people instantly. And another thing where the intuition is powerful is when you can detect emotions, intentions, and social dynamics through just very subtle cues or what we call micro expressions. Mga little cues na imo na day ma-pick up, and then now you have an inkling. You can now detect, no? So mo naman nakag-nice something fishy. So it's your intuitions that is at work. So some researchers found that for complex decisions, like say choosing an apartment or cars, people actually made better choices when they thought unconsciously rather than consciously. So when you think about it, there's wisdom in the old advice, right? Now, sleep on it, just sleep on it, and maybe you'd get better insight as to what you're gonna decide. Unsa na apartment imong i-choose. And then lastly, there's even what we call the blind sight, where people with certain brain damage can see things they're not consciously aware of seeing. But here's the key, class. This powerful unconscious system works through pattern recognition and associations. It's very fast and usually accurate. But then it's not 100% perfect. It can lead us astray when patterns don't repeat or when our associations are wrong. With that being said, let's now talk about when that powerful intuitive system goes wrong. One of the biggest problem is overconfidence. So people consistently overestimate how accurate their judgments are. So when people say they're 98% confident in their answers, they're wrong. They're what you call this? They're wrong 30% of the time. And the people who know the least are often the most confident. This is what we call the Dunning-Kruger effect. You guys heard of it? So you can see this in social media when the people that's very loud and arguing usually is not informed very well with the issue at hand. So it takes competence to recognize competence, and if you don't know what good logic looks like, you won't know what you lack. So the more clueless you are, the more clueless someone is, the more confident they tend to be. So think about the planning fallacy. We consistently underestimate how long tasks will take. So example, ani katong Boston Big Dig that was supposed to cost 2.6 billion, and then ilang target time to finish it is 1998. But what happened is it cost 14.6 billion and they finished it in 2006. So even professionals who should know better, whom we call experts, fall into this trap. So sa mga stock analysts there, they don't beat random stock selection. So political experts are no better than chance at predicting elections. The only professionals who show good calibration are weather forecasters and bookmakers. Ano man, because they're the ones who get immediate feedback. And these feedback or this feedback, they're the ones who get immediate, clear feedback on their accuracy. And we're all vulnerable to this. Intelligence doesn't protect us from thinking biases. And even if we pay people, quote unquote, experts for accuracy, it doesn't completely eliminate the errors. So, next, let's talk about the most pervasive biases and one of the most pervasive biases in human thinking, and that is confirmation bias. So, what is this? What's meaning confirmation bias? This is where we seek information that confirms our beliefs and avoid disconfirming evidence. So when we're met with an information that contradicts our beliefs that we already have, this is very uncomfortable for us. So we try to we cannot digest this kung we cannot digest this in our system. Kaya uncomfortable kayo ang contradicting information. That's why we only seek existing beliefs that already we seek information and we accept information that confirms our existing beliefs. So, unsa may mga example ani, this happens in both psychological laboratories when researchers conduct confirmation bias, and it also happens in our social lives. So, for example, we choose friends who see us as we see ourselves, even if we have negative self views. So, say a person who is domineering or who sees themselves as domineering, they might prefer friends who treat them respectfully rather than those who challenge them. So, in short, kaning confirmation bias indicates that we humans seek verification and not correction. We don't want to be wrong. It's very uncomfortable for us. Now, there are remedies to confirmation bias, and that includes seeking feedback. That's why weather forecasters and bookmakers are well calibrated kay immediate magod ilang feedback. And we can also break complex judgments into components and also force ourselves to consider disconfirming evidence. Remember in chapter 2, we talked about explaining the opposite. So this can also help in avoiding confirmation bias. Now, after talking about the perils of intuition, let's move on to heuristics or mental shortcuts. So our minds use mental shortcuts because this makes thinking simple and efficient. Pero these mental shortcuts or these heuristics, they can sometimes lead us astray. Although it is helpful from time to time, it also sometimes leads us astray. So, what are examples of heuristics? So, I'll give two: the representativeness heuristic and the availability heuristic. Let's start first with the representativeness heuristic. So, kaning si representative heuristic, this is when we judge things by how similar they are to our mental prototype. So, for example, Frank belongs to a country club, and Frank plays golf. Now, is he more likely to be a lawyer or a salesman? So, most people they would say when they're given this statement, they would say that Frank seems to be a lawyer because represents a typical lawyer, someone who goes to golf and country club. But statistically speaking, class, they're actually more salesmen than lawyers. So if you look at it from a statistics perspective, Frank is more likely to be a salesman. So let's proceed to the availability heuristic. So we judge how likely something is by how easily we can think of examples. I mentioned this one in chapter 1, I believe. So mga vivid, memorable events, they seem more common than they actually are. And nakakontribute pod ang media ani because they could completely distort our perception of frequency. Now, I have a quick question for you all. Which has a larger population? Is it Iraq or Tanzania? So, if you wanna really engage with the material and engage with this video, I suggest you pause it and then write your answer. Okay? So, after writing your answer, if you answered Iraq, then you're like most Americans because this is what they answered who has a larger population. Iraq ilang gibutang. But actually, Tanzania has about 20 million more people. Why do Americans, and if you answered Iraq, then why you and the Americans in the study answered Iraq? And that is because of the availability heuristic. Because on the news, Iraq is portrayed more, covered more. So Iraq is a more common country than Tanzania. And as mentioned, this also affects our daily fears and concerns. So we are more fearful of flying than driving, even though driving is statistically much more dangerous. And we also overestimate violent crimes because violence gets extensive media coverage. So another it's called also the probability neglect. So we ignore actual statistical risks and focus on vivid dramatic possibilities instead. So we're also constantly thinking about what might have been, and this is called counterfactual thinking. And it has some surprising effects sa ato ang emotions. So, for example, ang Olympic bronze medalists, they're actually happier than silver medalists. Why? Kay ang bronze medalists, they would think na, well, at least I got a medal. Pero ang mga silver medalists, they usually think na, if only I'd been a little faster, I would have won gold. So, the bronze medalists are comparing themselves to not getting a medal at all. Ang silver medalists, they're comparing themselves to first place. And we also see patterns that don't exist. And we're talking about illusory correlation here. So people look at random data and then they convince themselves they see meaningful relationships. So there's a study that's conducted about cloud seeding and people were shown completely random data. But they became convinced it confirmed their beliefs about whether the weather modification was working. And there's also the illusion of control. So we think we can influence chance events more than we actually can. So makita ni sa mga gamblers that throw their dice softly when they want low numbers. And people will pay 4 times for lottery tickets when they choose their own numbers versus having them assigned. So unsa may mga other examples sa illusion of control na you can think of or it's happening. So I want you to think of that. Then lastly, we have this regression towards the mean or toward the mean. Then extreme performances tend to be followed by more average ones. So you can see that the rookie of the year often has a disappointing sophomore season. And those students who do worst in the first test usually improve on the second, even without tutoring. But then we give tutoring the credit. So hinay, ang mga dito towards the end tail, if naka-statistics na mo, di ba na bell curve? So dito sa opposite ends of the tail of the bell curve, hinahinay magkaduol sa mean. That is just really a tendency, regression towards the mean siya. Next, we will talk about moods and how your current mood is influencing how you judge everything around you right now. So when people are in happy moods, they rate cars more favorably. And they think war is less likely, and they see themselves as more socially skilled. And then when people are in bad moods, they view the exact same videotape as showing an awkward, nervous person instead of someone who's confident. The scary part, ani class, is that we don't recognize our mood's influence. So as getting a small gift while shopping, or our favorite team winning, these can affect our major judgments and decisions. So there's a study, right, that servers gave their kanang table na ilang giservan o chocolates while example once the client asks for the bill. Ang kaning mga servers, if they give the bill with chocolates or candies, they found out that the person would tip more than when they're not giving candies. So it has a lot of explanation, like norm of reciprocity. Pero if you look at it in this perspective, sa moods and judgments, and if we anchor it in our current discussion, it could be part because maybe the act of receiving something sweet and something nice elevates the mood of the person, and so it also influences the way it influences their behavior. So we might not recognize that, but it happens. And what are the mechanisms behind this? Well, our current mood brings related thoughts to mind. So if you're happy, positive memories and associations become more accessible. Remember about the memory retrieval, that our feelings come into play when we're trying to reconstruct our memory. So if we're happy, ang mga memories nato na positive, it will become more accessible. And if we're sad, the negative ones are more accessible. So you can also notice this, diba, sa songs. If you're sad, you read the lyrics more, especially if it's a sad song. You read the lyrics more. And if you're happy, you're more likely just to go over sa lyrics and you hear the melody more. And especially if you want to dance, you just want to hear the melody. So emotional arousal also reduces complex thinking, which leads to people doing stereotyping and having snap judgments. Very huge ang practical implications ani class. Kay this means na ang job interviews di ay could be affected by the interviewer's mood. Ano na sila, if scheduled daw ka near sa lunchtime or kanang time na wala pa naka-lunch ang interviewer, like 11 kapin, then try to reschedule because more likely gutom imong interviewer, wala na sa mood. So ang imong result ana, it will be affected by their mood. So mga medical diagnosis po, it can be influenced by how the physician is feeling. And the legal judgments vary with the judge's emotional state. And there's a study that the judges gave harsher sentences before lunch when they're hungry and tired. So this is why it's important now when you're making a decision, a very important one, you consider its timing. So you don't want to make major life decisions and choices when you're extremely stressed out, where either you're very happy or you're very sad. Because imong judgment ani is colored in ways that you're not aware of. So now let's move on to the next topic, which is explaining our social worlds. So everyday class, you're constantly trying to figure out why people behave the way they do. And this is attribution. Now there's a fundamental question at the heart of it all. I'm gonna ask you. Is someone acting because of who they are or because of the situation they're in? Why did I ask that question? It's because we make two types of attributions. We have the dispositional attribution, which blame internal causes like personality, attitudes, abilities, while ang situational attribution blame external causes like the circumstances, the social pressure, and the context the individual is in. Now, there is what we call the CIT or correspondent inference theory. This is a kind of complicated theory to discuss for this lecture, so I'll go over it very briefly lang. So, ang saning CIT, correspondent inference theory, rational model ni siya that was developed by Jones and Davis that describes how people could logically, remember the word logically, they can make attributions based on observed behavior. However, ang nakita sa research is that people often deviate from this rational process and then they fall prey to different cognitive biases. So, before going over the cognitive biases, let's go first sa proposition ni CIT because again, it is a rational and logical model by which we attribute or explain behavior. So here's a simple example. Imagine you see someone that dropped their books and then another student rushes over to help that person. Do you automatically assume that the person who's helping the student is a nice person? Do you assume that? Well, not always, di ba? Not always. Kay CIT asked questions like, unsa man na conditions would make you confident in that judgment? So the theory argues, kaning CIT, that we are more likely to make a correspondent inference. That is, we infer the behavior, we infer that behavior corresponds to an underlying disposition when the behavior is not explained by the situation. So katong sa example, nga nung necessarily dili makamoingon right away na the person is a nice person. Kay it is what is expected of all of us. Di ba? We have the social desirability na, and we're also kanang raised to help everyone. So their situation doesn't really call for it. Di siya unexpected. Bottom line lang gid ani class is that we usually assume a behavior is a person's character or trait if it is an unusual behavior in a given situation where an expected behavior should take place. Okay? I hope gets Ryan wa na confused. So there is an expected behavior for that certain situation. If ni-deviate ang person sa kanina expected behavior, kanina deviation, we would likely attribute it to the person's personal characteristics, trait, or personality rather than if expected behavior iyang gihimo. So say being late, 'di ba? That is you're expected not to be late. And if you're someone na you're a student then na late ka, I would attribute you being late as your personality rather than the external circumstance. Like say na late lang jud kag mata kay naghago ka the night before. So daghan na siya key factors to consider a correspondent inference, which I will not detail here na, but some of it is the choice, social desirability, sa pa to? And basta, it has key factors in where we conduct correspondent inference. But that's already outside of our kanang topic. So what's remarkable about Annie is we're very quick in this attribution. So we make spontaneous straight inferences instantly and unconsciously. So if I tell you the librarian carried groceries for the elderly woman, you automatically infer na ang librarian is helpful. So even seeing someone's face for 1/10 of a second would trigger a trait inference. So let's talk about now Kelly's attribution model. It's kind of like CIT. It's also a logical model for how we make attributions. And it was developed by Harold Kelly. So according to Kelly, we should consider consistency, distinctiveness, and consensus. So unsa ning consistency in terms of the big three and how you attribute or explain behavior to the person. So you ask the question, how often does this person behave this way? And then distinctiveness, is this behavior specific to this situation? And then consensus, do other people behave similarly in this situation? But again, there is a problem. We often don't follow this logical process. We always take mental shortcuts that can lead us astray. So leading to that, with us getting mental shortcuts and that leads us astray, we'll talk now about the fundamental attribution error. So unsa ni siyang fundamental attribution error? So this is when we systematically overestimate the role of personality and underestimate the role of situations when explaining others' behavior. So there's a classic study that demonstrated this one. So students read essays that were either pro Castro or anti Castro. This Castro is a politician. So even when they were explicitly told that the writers had been assigned which position to take, students still thought that the writers really believed what they had written. So they say things like, yeah, I know he was assigned that position, but I think he really believes it. And this happens everywhere. So you can probably see that teachers seem brilliant because they ask questions in their areas of expertise. Pero pangutanag other areas, di na siya dili mi katubag. So in that aspect lang, the situation, which is the subject that they're teaching, so they've read the material 1,000 times, they've studied it 1,000 times. Of course, they're an expert, and they might seem smart in totality, pero in reality, they could be just smart in that area. And say medical doctors, they're presumed to be experts on everything. And if people are confident, if you're confident, you're also assumed to be more competent than you actually are. Manang natay phrase, diba, na confidence is the key. So why does this happen? Partly it's about where we focus our attention. We focus it on the person acting rather than the situation they're in. And cultural factors matter too. Western cultures emphasize personal responsibility more than situational factors. So not everyone makes attribution the same way because we're talking about cultural differences now. There are fascinating cultural differences in how people explain behavior. So Western cultures tend to focus on personal dispositions and individual responsibility, while Eastern cultures pay more attention to situational context and relationships. And this even shows up in language class. So an English speaker might say, Tom caught his sleeve on the gate, and then a Japanese speaker might say, the gate caught Tom's sleeve. So it's the same event, just different focus in the way it's said. And these attribution styles connect to broader cultural values. Ang individualistic culture, they promote internal attributions. Sort of like mga phrases na, you can do it. And then ang collectivistic culture, they're more sensitive sa community responsibility and situational factors. And there are very real political implications, Ani. So example, how do you explain poverty? Because the way you explain poverty predicts your political attitude. If you think poverty is mainly due to personal factors, say like laziness, lack of motivation, of course, you're less likely to support welfare programs. Remember the issue of the program? AKAP ba to? AKAP ba to na program? So remember again class, the Ayuda sa Kapos ang Kita program, the AKAP program. There was a noise sa social media about it because the people that are paying taxes, those that are working mainly, they're clamoring na we're paying people that are unemployed. So you might infer na kaning mga people who have this kind of views depends on how they explain poverty. So they probably think na these people under the AKAP or those who receive AKAP are poor because they're lazy or because they just don't want to work. Pero if you're someone that says, kanang, well, we're working and then we have better circumstances than they are, and so we need to help them. A portion of our taxes goes to them. That's fine. So the way you explain poverty could be because of situational factors like systemic ang issue, daily personal. It's not because they're lazy, it's systemic. They're faced with discrimination, they're poor, they're pushed to have poor education, they have a lack in opportunity. They're hardworking, but they lack opportunity. So you're more likely to have a positive perception of the AKAP. And research shows Americans and Hindus give different explanations for the same behaviors. Then in terms of noticing background context, the Asians notice more background context, some more visual scenes. And collective cultures consider group factors more than individual traits when explaining behavior. And class, even children learn these patterns. Education in the West, they teach their kids to explain behavior through personal characteristics. And these cultural assumptions, they get embedded in the curriculum and the teaching methods. So we're now done discussing the basic concepts about how we explain our social words, or in short, how we attribute or explain behavior. Let's now move on to the next and our last topic, which is expectations of our social world and why it matters. So I'll first discuss one of the most powerful concepts of social psychology, wherein sometimes our beliefs about people can actually cause those beliefs to come true. And these are called self-fulfilling prophecies. So I'm saying self-fulfilling prophecies. So there's a classic example, Ani. So I'll give an example first for you to anchor it on later in trying to understand the concepts. So example is a bank, right? There's a bank. And then if people believe that a bank is going to fail, again, there's the belief, then they will all rush to withdraw their money, which actually caused the bank to fail. So I want you to paan it. Okay, people falsely believe that a bank is going to fail. The bank is just sitting there, and then they believe now, oh, it's about to go bankrupt. And because this belief causes them to be fearful, and so they rush to withdraw their funds. So dagan kayo ni withdraw sa bank, it ended up making the bank fail in return. So ang false belief created its own reality. So in education, there's a famous research on teacher expectations kaning si Rosenthal and Jacobson. So teachers were told that certain students were about to bloom intellectually. And then these students were actually chosen randomly. Again, it's a social psych experiment. But then they showed greater IQ gains over the year. So ang kani siya na effect, kaning Rosenthal effect, it isn't as powerful as originally thought. Pero it shows up in about 4 out of 10 studies. And this effect is strongest for low-achieving students who needs positive expectations the most. So nga nung ni-work man ni siya kaning, why does this happen, kaning Rosenthal effect, teacher expectations? Because when teachers believe that their students are about to bloom, they unconsciously communicate their expectations sa students through nonverbal behavior. So what do we mean when the teachers communicate their expectations sa nonverbal behavior? They smile at the student more, they nod more at the student, they say more encouraging statements to the student, and they also give more time for the student to answer. So they call on them more, they give them more chances, kumbaga. So, mo na siyang it happens. But then again, the effect of this one is just kanang average. It's not really huge and just found in 4 out of 10 studies. And it has a bidirectional effect class. It works both ways. Kaya when students also expect their professors to be interesting versus boring, so kung kamo expect mo nako to be fun, so you actually learn more and the professors perform better. Kaya again, bidirectional ang process. Ang key insight ani is that expectations get communicated through subtle unconscious non-verbal cues, and people tend to respond to these cues by becoming more like what's expected of them. Now we have here the Pygmalion effect, the Golem effect, and the Galatea effect. So the Pygmalion effect is what's the other term sa self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is aka self-fulfilling prophecy. This is the general term that when there is a prediction, the prediction alters the performance and in turn fulfills the prophecy. So, going back sa teacher expectation. So, if ever I predict that this student would achieve higher grade, it alters my performance ani na student, which in turn fulfills the prophecy. So unsa man na performance ang na-alter? I probably give them more attention. I'll give them more high quality questions that engages their mind more. So now they're developing na and then they learn better. So in turn, ang akong prediction, because of the change in behavior, it fulfilled the prophecy that the student will ace the exams or etc. Ang Galatea is when self-perception alters self-performance. So instead of focusing a general prediction, it's more on your self-perception. For example, mana muna, I can run a marathon or I can do well in the exams. So it alters your performance because of your self-belief. That's why it's very important na you don't have a lot of negative self-talk. Kaya it affects you. So if you have a lot of negative self-talk, it works po, no? It works because we have the golem effect. Although the golem effect here, it usually applies to an external variable and then towards you. So say for example, a person na nagtrabaho or you're working and then your supervisor believes you to be a low performer. So that's a low expectation. So I don't give that person a lot of work. I give them the simplest task. I give them kanang pangbugo na task. And then eventually, kaning si employee na akong gibelieve na ay kanang performs poorly, eventually na bored out of his mind na siya. And so, nag-quiet quitting, dili na mo show up sa work, and then mo na ding uban na halong na change man siya na this person is a high performer. So if the people around you are wondering why there is a change in this person's behavior, chances are the change could be because of your low expectations ani na person. Okay, so there is a difference. Golem is low expectations that negatively alter performance. Galatea effect is your own self-perception that alters your self-performance. And then the Pygmalion effect, the general term, which is also known as the self-fulfilling prophecy, there is a prediction that alters your performance, and this performance in turn fulfills the prophecy. Now, self-fulfilling prophecies don't just happen sa classrooms, they happen in all our social interactions. And this is called the behavioral confirmation. So there's a belief that results in a behavior that results in the environment being influenced by that behavior. So I'll give a striking study class. So there are male college students that were tasked by researchers to talk on the phone with female students na wala pa gyud nila na meet. And before the call, the men were showed photos of the woman that they're talking to. So they don't have any idea what this person looks like. They just have a photo. But the thing here, ang photos, they're actually of different women. So randomize siya na ay attractive, na ay dili kayo attractive. And the people or the men that thought they were talking to attractive women, they behave more warmly during the conversation. So if you remember, there's also a study, diba, sa chapter 1 about the obesity study, the same as this one, wherein napatunayan na there are prejudice surrounding people who are obese. Kay they found out that just by looking at the person, a photograph, there is change in the way they talk to the person. So the same siya ani na kanang there is a change sa behavior na when they think that they're talking to an attractive person. So ang false beliefs sa mga men results in the false beliefs of men about the attractiveness sa ilang talking partner became self-fulfilling through their own behavior. And this has very important implications in reality and also for children too. There's a research showing na when you're telling children to be neat, it's less effective than congratulating them for being neat. So powerful kayo ang labels that we give people because these labels become self-fulfilling. So after hearing about all these mga biases or human errors, you might be wondering na kanang hala faulty jud kay ang thinking sa humans. No, we're just very terrible at thinking. Well, the answer anak class is very complex. Remember, you cannot simplify a certain behavior or thinking process because inherently kita complex ta na beings. And despite all the demonstrated biases na akong gi-share kanina, people are surprisingly accurate in their social perception. Most of the time, our first impressions are actually are actually often right than wrong. And these these are our fast thinking. It enables us to be good at reading faces, also detecting nonverbal cues and making mga social judgments. So ang realistic view ani is that we're both accurate and biased. We're also both efficient and error prone. And there is an adaptive value sa biases because these mental shortcuts serve us well. So why are we studying this? Why are we studying biases? Well, there are three. First, for humanitarian reasons, because we don't always want to blame people for the problems. Okay, again, you might just be product of this kanang biases. And then educational purposes, because we want to be aware and help reduce errors, because the minute that we're aware of something, then we can do something about it. Then lastly is scientific, because we want to understand scientifically how normal cognitive processes work. So I want to end this chapter through a practical note. How can we use this knowledge to make better judgments? And thankfully, yes, there are specific strategies in place for different types of error. So for overconfidence, we need to seek prompt feedback whenever possible, and then break complex tasks into smaller components. And then for belief perseverance, we need to consider the opposite strategy. Remember, explain the opposite that was discussed in chapter 2. So before settling on an explanation and rethinking the theory again and again, trying to connect and make patterns of that phenomenon till it grows its own legs, we have to actively try to think of alternative theories which can be true. And we need to generate multiple hypotheses or possible explanations rather than focusing on just one. Para dili ta magkuan, di ba? Dili ta kuan mas stuck up sa mga faulty thinking. And then for confirmation bias, we need to actively seek out disconfirming evidence. So ask yourself what would prove you wrong. Then look for that information. Surround yourself with people who will challenge your views constructively. Then for attribution errors, remember to consider situational factors when judging others. Ayaw sa unan idritso i-attribute sa iyang personality. So ask yourself what circumstances might explain their behavior before concluding na it's just their personality. So nga na nagid na siya na pagkatao. Try to look at what you might not see. Basig na late, kay nag-work di ay, way kaon, etc. And for important decisions, sleep on them when possible. Research found that your unconscious mind often processes complex information better than when you're consciously thinking about it. And also use multiple perspectives when you're evaluating options. So all of these no are kanang ways to counter the limitations. But remember, class, you can't eliminate all biases through education alone. Some automatic processes resist conscious control. There's always a trade-off between efficiency and accuracy, and perfect rationality isn't always adaptive. Ang goal nato is not perfect rationality. It's better calibration. We want to know when to trust our intuition versus when to use more deliberate analysis. And we want to maintain appropriate confidence while reducing overconfidence. Let me wrap up with the key takeaways from today's lecture. First, social cognition is efficient but systematically biased. We don't just perceive the social world, we actively construct it through our beliefs, expectations, and cognitive shortcuts. Second, these biases aren't flaws to be eliminated. They serve adaptive functions and usually work well, but they can lead us astray in predictable ways. Third, awareness can improve judgment, but it won't eliminate all errors. The goal is better calibration, not perfect rationality. Fourth, our beliefs about others are powerful. They influence how we treat people, which can make those beliefs come true through self fulfilling prophecies and behavioral confirmation. And the major themes we've covered are construction, automaticity, motivation, and social influence. So, construction, we actively build our understanding of the social world. Automaticity, much processing occurs outside conscious awareness. Motivation, needs for control, consistency, and self enhancement shape thinking. And social influence, our beliefs affects others' behavior towards us. So, as an end note, question your initial judgments, seek diverse perspectives, consider situational factors when judging others, recognize the power of expectations, balance confidence with humility, and remember, class, the goal isn't perfect rationality, but better, calibrated thinking that serves both individual and social well being. Thank you, class, for listening with me today. I hope you got out a lot of information, a lot of aha moments, and a lot of eureka and connecting the dots. And also that you had fun while also learning about it. Thank you, everyone, and as always, have fun learning.